confession time from the minister. A minister has two great fears every Sunday morning. First one is anyone going to show up? And I remember when I did the first Zoom service about a year ago, obviously I was at a different congregation since I'm relatively new here at UUFRC, but we did this Zoom service and we thought, is anyone going to show up? And I'm pleased to say most people do show up on a Sunday, so thank you all for being here. Now, the second thing, and maybe it's a more real problem, is does anyone ever listen to you? Do we really make a difference? Well, I was pleasantly surprised about 2 months ago when I remember Bruce Knoth contacted me, and he mentioned that a service I gave back in November, it was November 8th, it was right after the election, and I was talking about how we really need to build bridges. This isn't the time for gloating politically because one side won and the other side didn't. This was a time we really need to build bridges because we've got a lot of repair that we need to do in this country because of the divisions that I spoke about in the prayer. And Bruce mentioned that one of the things I mentioned during that service was the organization Braver Angels, who are trying to bring people together with different political views in conversations, in respectful conversations, not to change each other's opinions, but to listen and understand and connect through our common humanity. And Bruce said he had contacted that organization and he established this weekly conversation and this friendship with this person who identified very differently from him, who identified as an evangelical Christian conservative. And Bruce said these conversations were so fulfilling and he'd love to bring this to the congregation. So Bruce and I talked about it, and that's what this service is about. Scott Freeman is Bruce's friend that he connected with, and I'm really want to thank Scott for joining us today. It's really powerful. And I've said to him, I think it's really courageous what you were doing. And one of my messages in that service on November 8th was it was going to take courageous love to build those bridges. And it's going to take courageous love on all sides of this. No one group's got a monopoly in what's right. No one group's got a monopoly in courage. No one group's got a monopoly in compassion. And we need to come together with this. And I've been really, really enjoyed getting to know Scott. I met him 3 or 4 times with Bruce as we kind of planned this service, and it's really been great. And they're going to share how they came together. What kind of rules did they bring together when they first met? Because I think a lot of us, we do want to take that step. We do want to build that bridge across this divide because it's not doing any of us any good. It's not doing our country any good. We need to learn to be able to disagree respectfully. And I do not like the fact that we say we don't talk about politics and religion in polite company. I think we need to learn to talk about it. We need to talk about it respectfully. We need to learn to disagree respectfully. And we really need to take that time to approach it with curiosity, to learn from the other person and not get saddled with judgment, not get caught up in the caricatures and stereotypes that each political side casts on the other. We are all more complicated than any of those one identities. And that's not to say the differences aren't important, but it's also important to find what is that shared commonality. And you're going to hear about that from Scott and from Bruce in their reflections today. And I'm really, really pleased we can do this. I think if religious community cannot help pull this country together, where is the hope? And I think my greatest hope is religious communities coming together across real differences and connecting around that shared humanity. I quoted in November 8th, Abraham Lincoln, who said in his first inaugural address, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may be strange, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will yet swell the chorus of the union when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels of our nature. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion." And those words from 1862 still ring out to me. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise to this occasion. So today we're going to hear of 2 people, I believe, from Bruce and Scott, who have risen to this occasion, and I hope can be a model for all of us to take that courageous steps to really transform our world, through courageous love.
So I'd arranged my first date and I was nervous. We'd met online and we barely knew each other. My big hope was that opposites do attract, for then we'd hit it off. What will we talk about? How should I introduce myself? Will he even show up? What will we have in common? Ironically, we'd connected online over what we don't have in common: politics. I voted for Clinton and Biden, and he voted for Trump twice. I've been itching to understand how someone could do that, and took a chance on a man, an evangelical Christian, who posted his email address in a Braver Angels seminar. Today was the day we were to meet. Where will we start? Can I even hold up my end of the conversation? I don't really chat. Just imagining the conversation raised concerns. How on earth could you vote for Trump? What kind of person does that? Didn't seem like a good opening. Perhaps he wonders what kind of a person votes for Democrats. That's a good question. What's led me to vote Democratic for the past 40 years? What values led me there? Where did they come from? I mean, who the heck am I? I caught my breath before collapsing in an existential crisis, but it was clear I'd have to reveal more of myself to this stranger than I normally do, and I hoped he would do the same. Perhaps if we understood each other's life experiences, then we could have a thoughtful conversation about our differences. At 5 p.m. on November 28th, Scott Freeman joined me on Zoom. We spent a few awkward minutes figuring out where to start. We started at the beginning, with me speaking of my childhood years, he doing the same, and then described our adult lives. We spent almost an hour at that, and I'll sum up my background now, disclosing more than I would otherwise, but at a level I think is necessary to speak openly with someone whose values may be very different than mine. I can be stereotyped as a bi-coastal elite. I was raised on the East Coast by highly educated parents, been a lifelong UU, got a master's in engineering from MIT, married and raised 2 children, moved to California 24 years ago with my family, and worked in high tech for my entire career. We're fortunate to own our house, and I've never had to seriously worry about money or staying employed. I counter that stereotype by having co-led a 4-H club for 7 years, including processing chickens with my children and a team of adults. I have slowly progressing muscular dystrophy, which is something I've rarely told people, and I now view the world from the perspective of physical disability. Scott and I spent almost an hour on introductions before touching on political, moral, and social views. I'm happy to say we connected, and we've met every week since. I'll be reflecting on those conversations in a few minutes. I'm thrilled that Scott Freeman has agreed to speak with us this morning. Please welcome him now.
Good morning. This was not my first date, but it was one of my favorites. For a couple of decades now, I have regularly sought out respectful dialogue with people who disagree with me. I find this helps me to clarify my own thinking and to see outside of my own frame of reference. It enables me to enter into another person's world and to sometimes uncover my own blind spots. It also helps me to speak to others with better sensitivity. I've noticed that it is not easy to find people who will get on board with this idea. Many of my forays have been online. After 9/11, I realized that I didn't know much about Islam. So I bought a Quran and read it and joined an online Muslim group where I could ask questions to Muslims. More recently, after Trump was elected in 2016, I saw how emotionally distressed my liberal friends were. 3 weeks after the election, I joined a liberal discussion group called Safe Persons on Facebook. I hoped to demonstrate that Trump's election did not mean that half of America is racist, xenophobic, anti-woman, anti-gay, transphobic, and bigoted. I thought it might be some consolation for people to understand that better motives could be at play. That was a difficult dialogue as some folks did not consider me to be a safe person. But Bruce is a great partner. He took the initiative to respond to a chat message not even intended for him. In our first meeting, at his suggestion, we connected first as human beings, not as political adversaries. We began by sharing our upbringings and the life experiences that have shaped who we are. It was wonderful to have mutual understanding as a goal from the outset, as opposed to each of us trying to convert the other. Of course, we were well aware that there were very consequential questions that would have to be asked and answered eventually. But mutual understanding was a great place to start. It turns out that we are almost perfectly opposite, not only politically, but theologically, and even in our upbringings and subsequent life journeys. His parents were highly educated. My mother quit school after the 8th grade to help support her 6 siblings who were neglected by their alcoholic father. My mom never even learned how to drive. My dad was an iron worker, working his entire life for the same St. Louis construction company until he retired. While Bruce and I did both come from very secure and loving homes, Bruce chose a sensible career and has enjoyed the fruits of his educational choices. By contrast, my wife and I are both artists and met at the private art college we attended. Consequently, our 5 children were raised below the poverty line for much of their upbringing. I should add that my adult children would now tell you that this wasn't as bad as it sounds and that our family is rich in non-material ways. So that's not necessarily a complaint. Bruce and I have met together with our wives as well for a couple of Zoom dinners, and that's been great fun, at least for Molly and me. In our house, we have a saying, life is about relationship, both with God and with people. We have grown to love Bruce and Maeve, but perhaps even more remarkably, we have grown to like them in many ways. Knowing them has enriched our lives despite our many differences. On the door of my studio, I've hung a favorite quote by British musician Joe Jackson. It says, "People don't know what they want. They just want something good." He's referring to music, but I think his quote applies to a lot of life, including human discourse. To me, it suggests that there could be a third way, a road less traveled that is better than the labeling, prejudging, and wall building that seems to have become what Americans think they want. In seeking to understand rather than to change each other, it was at least a solid starting point to discover that Bruce and I are both trying to balance and act out of the same motives: compassion and justice, equality and freedom. We also found that we are both strongly committed to the proposition that every human being has inherent worth and dignity. While it's true that these shared values do not often lead us to shared conclusions, at least we can each trust that the other's conclusions are not intended to do harm. That's not everything, but it's definitely something. It makes trust possible. What have I learned about myself during this adventure? Well, I think it's more like a continual relearning. I've been continually reminded of how unnatural it is to be humble in relationships. I see this across the spectrum of my relationships. Humility is unnatural with the woman I've committed myself to for life. It's unnatural with my children. It's unnatural in my friendships. And those are my safe relationships. It's certainly unnatural with the political adversary. There is always the tendency to protect myself, always the impulse to justify myself. But I find that humility is worth the risk. In any relationship, from my marriage to my online relationships, a refusal to admit a wrong will keep the relationship from moving forward and growing. In an online relationship, most people don't even try. But I think I've seen both Bruce and myself make the attempt to override our natural defensive impulses in our conversations. This leads me to a second affirmation. I continually see that there are legitimate concerns on both sides of the issues that divide us. Even in my most confident, factually verifiable, and heartfelt opinions, it is never as simple as my side portrays it. It is always valuable to listen and to enter into another person's world. A third affirmation. While I think it's true that a refusal to admit a wrong will keep a relationship from growing, we can still disagree and continue in respectful, even constructive relationship. A difference in opinion is not necessarily the same thing as a refusal to admit a wrong. While Bruce and I walk the same planet and breathe the same air, we hold foundational worldview beliefs that are vastly different. To whatever degree either of us is incorrect, we are not being incorrect on purpose, so scolding doesn't help. Bruce and I have gone pretty deep into the most triggering social issues that divide the world today. Perhaps my most encouraging and hopeful takeaway is that it is even possible to do this and make a new friend in the process. Thank you.
So I recently learned of the 5 jagged rocks of Unitarian Universalism, derived from the UU principles and born of the concept that ours can be a dangerous faith, for the rocks can be forbidding, sharp, and painful. Those rocks are going to pop up during this reflection of mine. Thanks to a lifetime in liberal churches and a quarter century in our Bay Area bubble, I've been able to pay lip service to my beliefs. Freedom of choice, gay marriage, transgender rights, civil rights, I'm all in. Whip out our inherent worth and dignity principle and call it a day. I don't recall conversations in church with friends or elsewhere that have challenged me to think about my beliefs and actions the way that my weekly conversations with Scott have. I artfully dodged the "do you believe in God?" question by asking, "What do you mean by God?" or talking about the awe I feel gazing at the Milky Way on a dark night. I can't get away with that with Scott. Miraculous as I think the universe is, no, I don't believe in an omnipotent God. I think that we're here to do the good that we can do on earth, and when we die, that's it, we've left our mark. Incredibly, I found that these beliefs are grounded by the UU jagged rock salvation in this life. I've been lucky, and I hope Scott feels the same way, to find a thoughtful person from the other side to engage with. We set out to find common ground. Now, 6 months later, I compare that journey to joining a stranger on a quest through cold, creaking woods at night. It takes a long time to develop trust that the other person will stick with you through the dark as you venture deep into the scary parts. We've explored issues weekly since Thanksgiving, drawing from our lives and our faith. We've trusted each other to listen, respond honestly, and continue in conversation, even in the face of unresolved fundamental disagreement. I will introduce the scariest topic soon, but first I'll talk about the hindrance of the other. We are liberal, they are conservative. We are on the left, they are on the right. We are blue, they are red. Polarization, the divide, the other side. Sometimes that language is useful. Often it's damaging. When I tell friends I'm in conversation with a Christian evangelical, they've said, "Good luck with that," or "That must be difficult." The truth is, I think these conversations are a blessing. maybe even grace. Although we often don't agree, it helps me clarify my thinking and motivates research, which is how I discovered the rocks. I'm labeled liberal, Scott's labeled conservative. Much as we disagree on some core social issues, we align on others, including, for example, the vileness of racism and the evil of white supremacy. Scott does not represent all conservatives any more than I represent all liberals. And I better recognize that society is much more complex than simply two groups in opposition. I often hear the language of the other in our congregation, perhaps over coffee or in a group discussion, and I catch myself using it as well. Sometimes it's useful shorthand, but I think it can be harmful, for stereotypes lead to assumptions that may be wrong. For example, in our first conversation, Scott mentioned that he believes in the importance of family. I leapt to the conclusion that he meant the classic nuclear family with a mother, father, 2 children, and perhaps a station wagon, and I pounced. Later, I realized I'd made an assumption and instead should have asked what he meant by family. I understand better the danger in stereotyping, for labels reduce a person to a caricature, stop us from listening, and block understanding. I implore each of us to adopt they as a word that triggers careful thought, as in they are racists or they are homophobes. Some may fit the stereotype, but many others probably don't, and I believe we harm ourselves through careless use of language. Scott and I have spent months navigating the woods. We have built trust to the point that one of us will say, "You might find this offensive," knowing that the other will listen and accept, but probably disagree with the rest of the sentence, and our friendship would continue. Recently, we ventured into an area so scary that we'd already turned away from it several times. Honestly, it terrified me so much I wasn't going to mention it this morning, and I warned Scott away. Ultimately, however, I don't know why I'm getting emotional about this, but I'll tell you it's scary. Ultimately, however, that topic illustrates the jagged rock. Truth continues to be revealed. The topic, abortion. Scott and I have had 3 conversations about abortion, and we are in opposition. I don't think that's surprising or even interesting. But is there common ground? We're exploring that now, and it's intriguing, for it leads to a challenge for us Unitarian Universalists. What does it take to align with the other side? Is it possible? Is there common ground hidden in the most virulent emotional arenas? If there is, finding it will take careful conversation and openness to establish trust, with willingness to accept disagreement. What if some people who oppose each other on abortion recognize that fighting gets us nowhere and agreed to work together toward having every pregnancy be welcome? That unity is hard to imagine, but it leads to challenging questions for us UUs, such as, could we establish trust with and work next to people we strongly disagree with to achieve an important goal? How do we start? What would our covenants be? What would it take to succeed? What would we have to guard against in ourselves? Could the UU rocks of there is a unity that makes us one and courageous love transforms the world guide us through those woods, for it would be one scary journey. Thanks to my conversations with Scott, I've got a better understanding of my values, my beliefs, and my faith. I've learned, yet again, to try to listen and not react. I've gotten better at navigating disagreement and recently been intrigued by the possibility of teasing shared goals out of deep divisions. Personally, I've gotten to know one man from the other side well and developed an understanding of the jagged rocks that underlie our faith, one that continues to be revealed.
I'd like to thank both Bruce and Scott for sharing. That was powerful. And I invite us all just to take a moment to absorb what we've heard before we move on. At a staff meeting last week, our office administrator, Crystal, she was charged with doing the opening for it. And she brought out opening a bumper sticker, which was, "Don't believe everything you think." Don't believe everything you think. And I think you heard both with Scott and with Bruce there, the challenges that they brought to their own thinking and stepping into this. And the two things I heard that came out of it was courage and humility. And the Reverend Forrest Church, a Unitarian Universalist, or the late Unitarian Universalist minister, used to say that it's important to be humble, especially when you think you're right. It's important to be humble, especially when you think you're right. And I think, I can't speak for Scott, but I think we Unitarian Universalists could learn a lot from that. I don't know if we're often accused of being humble, but I think it takes a great humility to really truly question your beliefs. And as Bruce said, he doesn't feel that his beliefs are challenged enough within our congregation. And I'm going to take that as a challenge, Bruce, over the next few years of my ministry here to bring more challenges to our congregation. But it's up to all of us to do that. And thank you, Scott, for bringing your challenges through this. And again, I want to hold up the courage of you coming in here. And I know when Bruce and I first talked about this, I was genuinely worried that would Scott be treated with respect in our congregation? Could people avoid trying to challenge him in his politics and his religion and accept him and listen to his message with curiosity and not judgment? What can we learn from Scott? And I think that's what we need to do with the encounter with different. Can we really listen without judgment? When we hear views that challenge us, not only going to change our views, but really getting to know that idea of empathy, learning to feel with, learning to live with, learning to understand a person's perspective. Not that we need to agree with it, but can we understand where that person's coming from? Because we don't often do that. We create these stereotypes, we demonize, and we create these caricatures, and both sides do it. We create these caricatures. But I'm putting out the challenge to our religious community. Can we move beyond stereotypes, beyond caricatures, to connect with that humanity as our faith calls us to be? Can we bring that humility to our beliefs, to our values? The Reverend James Ford, the great African-American religious leader, says, when people rely on surface experiences and false stereotypes rather than in-depth knowledge of others at the level of the heart, mind, and spirit, their ability to assess and understand people accurately is compromised. When people rely on surface appearances and false racial stereotypes rather than in-depth knowledge of others at the level of the heart, the mind, and the spirit, their ability to assess and understand people accurately is compromised. And invite us to really live into that. What does that mean if we really seek to see beyond stereotypes? Because the only thing you can tell by looking at someone is your own prejudices. The only thing you can tell about when you know someone's politics is your own biases. And I think we had a great example of how both Bruce and Scott, through their relationship, were able to move that. And that is one of the greatest signs of hope I've come across in many years. And I thank you both for your humility and courage in doing this. So thank you so much. And I believe it was an act of love that brought you together. It was courageous, humble love for one another. And the Christian tradition is love thy neighbor as you love thyself. What greater testimony, what greater statement of hope can there be than that? So thank you.